Hi, I'm Stephen Greenhut, Director of the Pacific Research Institute's Free Cities Center. We're a new website that looks at important urban issues, and we're here in downtown Sacramento on K Street, which is the main drag through the downtown. And the city here has focused heavily on redevelopment and eminent domain policies over the years, and as we'll see, it's not the nicest part of downtown. In fact, the street is a mess. So we're going to look at redevelopment agencies. They started in the 1940s as a way to fight urban blight. They quickly became a tax capture scheme by cities, and many city councils and boards of supervisors abused the process to take property from one set of owners to give it to another set of owners. And what we've argued on the Free City Center is that instead of letting the market work, or these redevelopment agencies distorted the market, they put city officials in charge, and the result has been a mess. So behind us are a couple of properties that received millions of dollars in redevelopment agency subsidies. One of them's not open any longer. The other one's a dive bar. And we're going to look at some other projects and some eminent domain takings along the route. I'm here with Richard Mercero, who is a longtime Capitol insider, and he's been busy.
Thanks for the compliment.
Yeah. And he was active. We were allies when I worked at the Orange County Register full-time in fighting eminent domain and fighting redevelopment agencies. So Richard, thanks for joining us here on lovely K Street. So I think first, before we take the little tour down K Street, tell me about your involvement with the whole eminent domain battle and the redevelopment agency battle.
Well, going back decades, the legislature has been integrally involved in abetting the ability of redevelopment agencies to take, again, I always called it their dirty little secret, because as the tax increment, which you were talking about, they would look for legislation that would allow them to access more funding, which quite frankly was going off to their particular projects and was generally unavailable for the purposes of the state. And unfortunately, the legislature, you could always find within a community, whether you were in Riverside or in Orange County or places that were traditionally Republican, you would always find a certain number of elected officials and a certain number of developers and interest groups that would be in favor of the project du jour. And so it was very difficult to really take a principled stand over time on a lot of this legislation. Now that's the role of staff, is to provide an objective, unbiased view of legislation, irrespective of the political winds that are blowing or the financial powers that be. And so I had a lot of years of analyzing that on the Constitutional Amendments Committee and the Revenue Tax Committee, and then in my capacity as the policy director. I was involved in property rights in a significant way was in the immediate aftermath of the Kelo decision. States across the nation acted immediately to redress what they saw as profound, and what we obviously saw as the profound, injustice of the decision.
And the court, just to start to interrupt, but the court justices urged the states to do that, even though they came down on the wrong side. Right. They basically invited the states to reform their laws.
In Justice Stevens' 5-4 decision, because again, we should never forget, that's a 5-4 decision.
Right.
That was not one, and we mentioned Justice O'Connor earlier. Justice O'Connor's dissent was so powerful by her own admission, because she had been in the 9-0 majority in the Midkiff decision, the Hawaii case,
right,
and she felt that the precedent had been followed inappropriately, and that what Kelo was doing was a profound injustice. In contrast, that would say Professor Erwin Chemerinsky, who's now the dean at Bolt Law School, California's most eminent law school, and he came out and said that Kelo did nothing. It made no change whatsoever, when it made a profound change in going from a bona fide public use, meaning a road, meaning a dam, meaning a school building, meaning a jail facility or a federal court facility, to any public purpose. Again, Justice O'Connor used the phrase, it renders everything mere hortatory fluff. I love that. I had to say
and public purpose means anything that the legislature says is a public purpose.
Exactly, and that's where she was so outraged, because she said it tied the hands of all courts across the country to be able to go in and say what is a public purpose and not. It rendered everything a public.
For those who don't remember the Kelo decision, it involved the neighborhood, the Fort Trumbull neighborhood in New London, Connecticut, and it was the city's redevelopment agency took the neighborhood to give a corporate headquarters, and there were surrounding developments. none of which came to pass, by the way. And I don't know where it stands now, but in recent years it was just empty lots. So that shows a couple of things. We're using the court allowed cities to take property from one set of private owners, give it to another set of private owners, and then cities don't do a very good job of redeveloping things. And then the property just sat there and languished. And I know in Santa Ana, in Orange County, the city's redevelopment agency took so many properties, and they're just vacant lots all over the place.
In New London, Connecticut, Suzette Kilo's little pink house was bulldozed. To this day, it is an empty lot. Wilhelmina Dairy, whose family bought, she lived there for 87 years. Her family bought it during the administration of William McKinley. For those who were paying attention in high school, that was before Teddy Roosevelt. They'd owned that house. That house was bulldozed. She was forced to leave her home at 87. Nothing has happened. And that case was decided in 2005. So think of that. 18 years later, nothing has been done. The corporation in question walked away. The development has languished. So where once there was a vibrant neighborhood of people who had been part and parcel of that community, they were forced at the point of government's gun to leave their homes. They had to hire lawyers in order to get fair market value, that just compensation the Constitution demands. And today, 18 years later, all there is chain link fencing.
Yeah, here we are in the downtown commons, Doco.
Doco.
Well, I wonder how much they paid a consultant to come up with that name. And we're sitting on these benches, but I wonder how much.
I hope they're lead silver.
Yeah, they're very lovely. But actually, this isn't a bad looking little area. But it's the. I remember when this shopping mall was decrepit before they built all of this, and what they built was the Kings Arena behind us, with a great deal of public suffrage. And these are the kind of projects that I think planners always envision, and I don't think it's a bad project. It's just a matter of a lot of what we see with redevelopment. You get these big concrete, fancy, subsidized projects surrounded by the blight that never goes away, and the whole project is done in the name of removing blight, and they rarely remove blight, right?
Well, the problem is that the blight goes somewhere, and the hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies that was involved in just this project. And imagine going to a city with 4 or 5 times the population, building much larger and grander esplanades. And, they all have the cool names from the consultant, right? What could that money be used for, or given back to the taxpayers whose hard-earned money it is in the first place?
Opportunity cost.
That's a key consideration. We've seen study after study that says this just does not pay for itself. Never has and never will. The science is clear on that, but yet again, the powers that be love to do these projects, but it's always at the expense of someone. And as we were talking about earlier, in sworn testimony in the aftermath of the Kelo decision, we saw that 95% of all the properties that were taken in San Jose when they were engaged in a large redevelopment project were taken from persons of color, when the population area was only 35% persons of color. There's a disproportionate impact.
Redevelopment restricts actual real redevelopment in many ways. So one example I gave, I was on a parish council of a church, and somebody had donated a medical building in a kind of an impoverished LA County town. And we were trying to decide what to do with it. Were we going to build a new building? Were we going to renovate it? But the redevelopment agency was going through turmoil, and it was in a redevelopment zone, which meant we had no secure property rights. If we invested a lot of money right now, the city could decide to take it next month or next year, and then we couldn't plan on the investment. So we fixed the roof and let it be, right? And that happens all over the place. If property owners don't have the security to know, like if you and I invested in a building, we plan that we maybe want it for a few years or 10 years or whatever, or a business, but you don't have that security of property rights.
Absolutely, and again, we'll talk about the Joe Sun and Company building that's right down here at 704 K.
Talk about that.
Okay,
yeah.
well, we'll start there. In 1970, the Joe Sun family, who had been selling Levi's jeans and Dickies literally for decades in Sacramento, working clothes for working people, bought the building at 704 K Street. They were part of this community for 36 years, paying the property taxes, cleaning up, doing everything they could to make K Street Mall a better place, through all the ups and downs and the tumult that took place on K Street Mall. Come 2005, 2006, the powers that be at the city council meet up with a couple of business owners, and they decide they want his property because they're going to repurpose it for something. And under the Kilo style takings provision of public purpose as opposed to public use, they believe that they could get more property tax revenue, more sales tax revenue out of the site. So they came to him and quite literally made him an offer he can't refuse.
You literally can't refuse.
Conferred eminent domain,
yeah,
and said they were going to take the building that his family bought for $1.2 million. And so he has to go out and he has to engage legal counsel, and the family has to come in and fight and argue. And you use the perfect example. The sword of Damocles is hanging over their family's business. They come back, they argue $2 million, but never, we're way overpaying. And what was really offensive to me was taking someone who'd been a part of trying to make K Street right for 36 years and saying, okay, we don't need you anymore. Never taxed delinquents, never blighted, never anything. We're going to take your property because we have more grand plans. Oh, by the way, we'll find you someplace in a basement somewhere. But we don't want to pay too high because then we'd be taking advantage of the taxpayers. It was the most disingenuous,
and they're not allowed to overpay
argument.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they ended up, the sons sold. But they sold for $8 million. So they got far closer to that just compensation which the Constitution demands. It's not a suggestion, it's not a good thing, it's a constitutional imperative. But they had to litigate this for years. They had to have their business upset and whatnot. And as we walk by there today, the building's empty.
Right.
All the grand plans and visions for that, which necessitated forcing a family business to leave, never to return, have not come to pass.
Yes.
But Thomas Jefferson, the first great thinker of our founding, believed that a person's property right was so important and so integral that you couldn't even take their property if you needed it for flood control or a road or something that was indisputably of public work. But now we're going to say, well, we don't like the fact that you sell work clothes, and so we're going to put a high-end boutique in instead.
I know, it's picking winners and losers, and
something government does very badly to begin with, but whether or not it was excellent at it, it's something it fundamentally should not do. It is not only not the proper role of government, but doing that to law-abiding citizens who, as you correctly suggest, if you don't want to sell, you should not have to sell.
yeah, and we've kind of made peace with the idea of public uses,
Right,
long
right.
ribbons of land like freeways, but even that could be abused. I mean, the railroads were given the power of eminent domain,
And they have it today still.
Yes,
The Public Utilities Code.
And if you look at some of the routes, let's just say they weren't always the most direct point A to point B. They often were derived to take properties that were beneficial.
Well, and
to
again,
the owner.
I don't think we should ever for a minute not mention the fact that oftentimes that came at the expense of persons of lesser means, less political connection, and minority communities. I mean, to my mind, the thing that's sad is that so many good people who are public-spirited bought into a really bad program with decades of proof that it didn't work. You know, Auburn had a redevelopment agency, and Auburn, under its mayor, Kevin Hanley, ran it very, very differently. So here is a property rights advocate, second to maybe only you, who will say there were people who may have been able to do redevelopment right, but no. The proof is in decades of using eminent domain, of abusing the process.
The threat of the process.
Absolutely.
How it overhangs every decision property owners make. So you're right, there have been some redevelopment projects at, downtown Pasadena. Okay, fine. I tend to believe that would have happened anyway with market forces. I also think of Anaheim, where their beautiful downtown was basically demolished in the 70s. So the bad isn't worth the good.
But mayors like Kevin Hanley and Kurt Pringle refused, as a matter of first principle, to use eminent domain. Kevin in Auburn, longest serving mayor in the history of that town. That was a first principle. and they were able to do the things that they wanted to do without the threat of eminent domain, without lowballing people, and without all of the attendant political machinations that invariably are part of that process.
Well, I have one final point to make. One of the people who advocate for bringing back redevelopment, they point to the fact that redevelopment, the tax increment, 20% of it was supposed to go to, was earmarked for affordable housing, government subsidized projects. So they blame the end of redevelopment for the housing crisis. In reality, a lot of those projects were, those high cost projects. Some of the wealthier cities like Indian Wells didn't even want to build them, so they gave their credits to other cities. But beyond that, what it did was it fiscalized land use. You used that term before. So it encouraged city officials to view every parcel as what's the possible property tax return. That in turn undermined housing development.
Absolutely.
So redevelopment is a net negative for housing, even on its own terms. I think it harmed that. It helped create the housing crisis.
And as you, as the director of the Free Cities Project, have focused very keenly on the legislation that recently passed, SB 9, SB 10.
Good bills.
Good bills. So many of the entities and individuals who are calling for redevelopment to come back are the ones who are most opposed to this new opportunity to build additional housing. So I think it once again puts the lie to it in a lot of ways.
It's all about power and money.
Has it ever been otherwise?
Probably never will. Well, Richard, we thank you for your time here, and
thank you.
Yeah, you coming out to K Street, lovely and not so lovely K Street,
my hometown for 61 years.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.